Not there. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to Chattering with Nicholas Vince. In a few moments, I'm going to introduce Joe Becker, and we're going to be talking about a number of things. But before I do, I have some shout outs. Hi, not seen anybody for God 6 weeks. Was really not expecting it to be quite so long. The reason it's been so long is I was going to have a show last week with Jim McLeod, who from Ginger Nuts of Horror, but he will hopefully be coming back later in the year. We're planning on getting him back. But I ended up by filming something called Paintball Massacre. I had a wonderful couple of days on Paintball Massacre. That was so much fun. So they're still filming. But yeah, amazing time. The other thing I need to do is we were at Scarefest in Lexington. I had a really good time there. And one of the things that I got, which I'm terribly, terribly proud, and that's Vincent Price's signature. Obviously not an original, but it's signed by his daughter, Victoria Price, who's absolutely lovely. And as you know, I am a huge, huge fan of Vincent Price. And the other thing is I was given this most beautiful artwork, which some of you may have seen on my profile. That's by a gentleman called Kane. His actual real name's Jack, but he signs himself Kane. I just thought that was absolutely beautiful, so I wanted to share those two things with you. So yeah, let me introduce Joe. Let me just click on that. Hi, Joe.
How's it going?
It's going very well. I just can't get over the fact Joe and I were chatting yesterday, and he's shaved now. He's beautifully got. You've got this gorgeous moustache.
I did it special for the show.
Absolutely gorgeous.
How much do you want for the Vincent Price autograph thingy?
That's not going anywhere. That's not going anywhere. You can meet Victoria. Victoria does conventions. You can get one signed definitely to you. I, as people watchers of the show will know, Vincent Price was my all-time favorite actor. Just amazing as far as I'm concerned. His daughter Victoria is absolutely lovely. I had really good fun chatting with her when we were at the convention. She's got a gorgeous dog, the name of which I can't remember. But yeah, it was very good.
Do you remember when he made an appearance on an Alice Cooper album?
Do I know? This sounds familiar. Remind me.
Yeah, it was a song called The Black Widow. And I believe it was on the Welcome to My Nightmare album. And I think he does the intro, and then he also speaks in the middle of it. But it would be cool if you got a copy of that album and then had Victoria sign that.
That would be very cool. I mean, somewhere I've got Thriller. I've got the original LP of Thriller.
It's on that too.
Yeah, because see, now I can just channel his. I've just got his voice. I can't do a Vincent Price impression, so I'm not even going to try. But yeah,
it's all about the attitude anyway.
Yeah. So now, before we go any further, I know you need to do some shout outs, so let's get those out of the way, so you don't need to worry about those.
Oh, there's lots of people I got to shout out to. First and foremost would be GHS Strings. They outfit me with all the guitar strings for every guitar that I have, and you've seen at least a portion of my guitar collection, so you know that's a lot of strings, and they're great strings. I've never used anything else. There's Analysis Plus cables, which I recorded approximately 2/3 of Monster with. I had already started Monster when I hooked up with them, and they sent me some cables. And the cool thing about it is that with these cables, when you plug them in, there's something about them that is just noise inhibiting. If you have any noise in the area that you're trying to get rid of while you're recording, and you know that's the thing that recording artists, at least, we're always battling, is how to make things as quiet as possible. Analysis cables kind of came to the rescue in the case of Monster. So all the recordings you hear on there that are super clean and clear, it's obvious those are Analysis Plus cables. And then obviously Morley pedals, which I've always used Morley pedals. I use a model of their wah pedal that's not just a wah pedal, but it's also a volume and it's also a distortion. And the distortion in that pedal is just crazy sick. I've used that on all kinds of things, including a song called Blues for Drinking, which appears in the movie Leaf Blower Massacre too. So definitely, I got to say something about those three companies right out of the gate.
Cool. Because, yeah, of course, for me, who's not a musician, I kind of understood most of what you just said, but I'm assuming that any guitar player would actually understand what you're talking about.
Well, anybody who focuses on purely just sound recording knows what I'm talking about. Even your audio files out there. So.
Right. Oh, cool. All right. Well, it's good that you've. How long have you been working with these companies or working with these products?
Morley and GHS, I want to say a good 15 years, maybe 20 years. I'd have to think about that. Analysis Plus since 2 years ago, I believe. So, and they hooked me up with really long cables, which that was the surprising thing, is that typically the longer your cable gets, the more noise you kind of are going to introduce into the system. And they sent me two or three 25-foot cables, and no, not a peep, not a squeal out of them, not a hum, not a rattle, not a pop, nothing. So yeah, that's something to be said for equipment.
Yeah. No, I should say that we're not. The sound quality that you're hearing at the moment, folks, that is not based on that, because this is just a thrown together for doing this interview. So, how did you get into music? Now, you started at a really young age playing guitar.
Yeah. Well, basically, it's kind of funny. My dad is a musician. My uncle Ed is a musician. My other late uncle, through marriage, Joe Kelly, he was a musician. He was actually the lead guitarist for a band called The Shadows of Night. They did that song Gloria, Gloria, Gloria. That was his band. And so with my dad being a musician, and he was writing and recording music all the time, and obviously he ushered me, he wanted me to be a musician too. I really didn't understand that I didn't think the world did anything different. I thought that's what people did. I was 4 years old when I first started. I thought everybody played guitar and that was just life. And it wasn't until I got a little older, people started telling me, what you're doing there is special, especially because I was doing it at such a young age. And that's why I get phone calls at home from Jonathan Brandmeier, who he would call me at home and say, hey, actually he would call my mom, and then she would hand me the phone, and then he would ask me to play certain things, and that would be that. So it's just been something that I've always been and love to do, and it's part of who I am. So
and Jonathan was a radio host. Is a radio host or was a radio host?
Yeah, you probably wouldn't know because you're on the other side of the pond. But in Chicago, Jonathan Brandmeier was one of the biggest radio DJs syndicated across the country for quite a number of years. So to be on his show was kind of fun until I went to school one day, and I walked into the school. I think I was in 3rd grade, 4th grade, something like that. And somebody, because I had been on the radio early in the morning prior to school, somebody recorded it. And when I walked into the school, they were playing it over the intercom, which was kind of embarrassing for me at the time. But, when you're a kid, the stuff like that, you can't quite make all the best sense of.
Absolutely. So you, in terms of playing, okay, so you're playing guitar, you're occasionally playing it on, and you become a musician. Were you a part of a band, or did you just play sessions, or how did the career kind of take off?
Well, I had a couple bands when I was younger, but basically one of the things, and I learned it from watching my dad, and actually I learned it with a very specific piece of equipment, which was a Sony TC630 reel-to-reel. It has a feature on it called Sound on Sound. So unlike a multi-track recorder that gives you, say, 8 or 16 tracks available to record, one part for rhythm guitar and one part for lead guitar and one part for bass, what this thing would do would be allow you to, say, record on the left channel and then bounce that over to the right channel while you record it again on top of it. And so it was like a controlled bleed, right? So what he would do is, he would record rhythm guitar, bass, and then anywhere from 3 to 6 vocals, all using that machine. So it was one person doing all the parts of everyone. Because I learned that methodology, that's the same methodology that I still use today. So when I started making music for sale and for use in different publications, basically what you hear, yeah, I'm playing guitar and everybody knows me as the guitar player, but I'm also playing the piano, I'm also playing the bass, I'm also playing all of the other instruments that you hear. So when you can do that by yourself, you kind of don't need a band. And especially in the business that I'm in, you don't need to go and be a road warrior or go play at a bar or play at a wedding to make your money. You do what I do. So I create music that's my music, original music that people buy, and that's just to support myself as an artist. Then I record music for horror films, almost exclusively horror films, although I've done some benefit stuff for kids with cancer and things like that. And basically, as a musician, you're always creating, kind of like any artist. If you were a painter, you do that for your own enjoyment. It's kind of like part of your soul. You paint, and a painter winds up with a bunch of paintings. At some point, I have a bunch of recordings. I think I'm up to almost 200 recordings that are in my catalog that different places can use. If they want to use them for their film, they can go through my entire catalog and say, I like this piece or that piece or that piece. Sometimes they come to me and they say, I want something brand new. And that's why I have the studio here, so I can do that work. In some cases, at the end, I'll do something for a film, and if it's not signed away to the film, I can take that piece of music and sell it as my music. And that's also kind of part of the way Monster came into being.
Right. So how much, it's interesting to listen to you talk about the fact that you're able to work without a band, which is obviously the way that most or many musicians go. Do you miss the camaraderie of a band, do you think, or are you just happy being by yourself?
No, it's easier for one thing, it's easier to control everything when you're by yourself. And then you don't have to deal with things like people being late. You don't have to deal with people being alcoholics or any of the other dynamics, that go with, this person doesn't like that person necessarily. All that goes away. And so not only do you not have to deal with that, but you can execute real quick.
Right. It was interesting because you mentioned earlier on you've got a large number of guitars. Do you use the different guitars because they produce a different sound, or is it just because they feel different? Or why do you have a guitar problem, basically?
There's a method to the madness, but essentially part of the reason I have so many is not just because I love them and they're what I use and work, but I have them all tuned to a different key. So if let's say I just have an idea for something, I can hear it in my head. I don't necessarily know exactly what key it's in, or at that moment, if I rush downstairs, all I have to do is strum every single one of the guitars until I find the right key, and then I'm off and running. So there's a mechanical advantage to having as many guitars as I do.
That is absolutely fascinating. You reminded me of an American composer who had a piano built specially for him, and I can't remember. He was a famous American composer from around the 1930s, 1940s, and he had a lever on the piano that would change the key for him. So he knew how to play music, but he wasn't so good at transcribing into different keys. And so he literally just had a lever on his piano so that he could move it and just shift it. And saying, oh, it actually sounds better up there rather than that. So he could just stick with the same fingers on the same keys and get it out of his head. That's really fascinating as to why you got. So now you talked about, you've done over 200 pieces. How do you, and you've talked about you mentioned the fact that you do film. How do you approach that? Is it normally that people will just show you the finished film, or with time codes, etc., and just say, okay, we need music for this bit? Or how do you prefer to work when you're composing for film?
I prefer not to work. So I prefer that my catalog is just reviewed and someone selects music that they can place and they know where they're going to place it. And then that's kind of the end of the story.
Right.
If I am actually working to footage, basically they give me a rough cut with time code. And what I'll do is I'll actually have several meetings with the producer or the director, whoever's in charge of that decision making, and I'll show them options. I'll say, well, when I'm seeing this footage, I hear this. What do you think about that? Do you like that, yay or nay? And they give me the yay or the nay, and we kind of move on from there. Once I have a kind of their vision and everybody's on the same page about what things are going to sound like and what the music's going to be like, then basically I start with their footage imported into my software. I use Cubase, and so if their time code is 00000, that's where I start, and I record everything, and then I export that to either a WAV or an MP3, whatever sound file that they want. And then I send it back to them so that they can then import it with the starting being at 0000000, and everything syncs up in time.
Right.
I had an issue recently with a film because they didn't have a sound designer, and the product didn't go through any mastering. And so typically, and I've had music in a lot of movies so far, and a lot more are coming out. But typically, I'll just hand the music over as I've recorded it, and somebody on the mastering or the editing end will adjust the bass and the volume and the treble, and they'll make sure that it sounds good when you play it through a television set. And that didn't happen with this project. So now I still have to go back and kind of do that for them. I can kind of do that correcting because I have the capability, but nobody told me they needed me to be the one doing that. So I'm just kind of coming in and trying to save the day with that. But yeah, normally I just hand the stuff off, and if you want to use my music, if you've heard my music, you've seen it in a different project, then here you go. Go through the catalog, pick what you want, and go from there. Give me my credits and whatever else we agreed to, and that's the end of it.
Right. So do you more predominantly just compose for your like your own benefit, for your own enjoyment, and do you, without wanting to pull the curtain too far apart about your process, what comes first? I'm always fascinated. Is it the music or the lyric?
Well, the majority of the music that I've made that is popular is instrumental. Unfortunately, the market for what I'm really good at has died, and that's instrumental guitar music, like Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and all those guys. That world has shrunk down to basically those two guys. And kids today, they're not looking to learn to play guitar. They don't have guitar heroes anymore. They're not into that. What's popular today is things like rap. The kids want to dance or something. I guess they don't want to become the next Eddie Van Halen anymore. So there was a time when the majority of the music that I made was instrumental, and there was still a market for it. I caught it at the tail end of the market, just before it died, but I had to shift gears. So now the music I'm creating does have lyrics, and I would say it's probably a 50-50 mix. When I get an idea, it's either because I have something funny in my head that I thought lyric-wise would work, or I already have a musical idea that needs words, and so I just follow along with that as I'm playing, and I bust out the old pen and paper and kind of go from there.
Do you just write the lyrics down, and you may put in some chords when you're doing that? You won't notate it.
Well, no, actually, it starts with the chords. Basically, as a musician, there's always been two schools of thought. You're either classically trained, so basically you sight read sheet music and you perform somebody else's music. Creation is very frowned upon. If you do understand theory, then you could become a composer, and then you write out sheet music, and somebody else is playing your music. Or you have kind of like how blues and rock started, is you're a folk musician, and you operate differently that way. So instead of just sight reading sheet music, you memorize very large pieces of music, and that's kind of the way you operate. So writing then kind of becomes the same thing. So if I'm going to write a song, the first thing I'm going to do is figure out some sort of chord arrangement and some sort of rhythm that repeats, and obviously has, will either bring you to a bridge or some sort of hook, and obviously an apex, and so on and so forth. So I'll have that to work with already, and then I'll start penning lyrics after that.
Right.
It's just the way I work. So.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely fascinated by all this stuff. So we have a good question from one of our viewers, Kim. Hi, Kim. Thank you for joining us. Kim asks, Joe, who inspired you to be a composer? Also, so it's two questions, in fact. So first question, who inspired you to be a composer?
Oh, so many people. Initially, it was my dad. I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to do what my dad was doing, and just like the rest of my family who were musicians, that was my inspiration. But in getting older and then actually analyzing music and studying music and enjoying music, there are a few other people that really truly inspire me. And I have to say today, at my old age, probably Jeff Lynne of Electric Light Orchestra. He's probably my biggest hero when it comes to composing. And if I'm going to compose something, I'm going to try and approach it with him in mind. And then obviously Paul McCartney and the Beatles. Because I'm a very hook-oriented person. So yeah, I'd have to say those two are the biggest ones.
Right. Okay. And in terms of, you mentioned your music is mostly used in horror films. Do you have a particular favorite horror genre, such as slasher? What sort of horror movies do you enjoy watching?
Honestly, I like B horror movies and anything that's kind of is so bad it's good. Anything that this is why I make music for movies like that are called Leaf Blower Massacre 2. If that's any indicator, and you could look at some of the other movie titles that I've done. If it's corny, that's what I'm into.
Right. There's some great movies out there. There's a documentary on a leprechaun, which they're trailering, and just saying that if a book is bad, it's bad, but a film can be bad in so many different ways. That can be so bad it's good.
Right.
There is a whole genre of films. Tommy Wiseau's The Room, which I've not seen the film, neither the film or the Franco biopic about it. That sounds absolutely fascinating. Cool. All right, so let's move on to Night of the Living Bread.
Yeah, there you go. That this is exactly what I'm talking about. That's basically that movie, and the reason I like it so much is because they really they jumped on the idea. I don't know how many of the viewers know, but Night of the Living Dead is public domain, so you could go ahead and take a copy of Night of the Living Dead, and you can repress it on a DVD and attempt to sell it and make your money. That's fine. Or you can rewrite the movie. You can use the footage for the movie. You can do whatever you want with it. So they came out with this movie called Night of the Living Bread, and basically all they did was replace all the zombies with slices of bread. And it's that simple. So in the opening scene where, Barbara, she's in the car, and she rolls down the hill and she's trying to get away from slices of bread, and she's locked in her car and she hits the tree and she's looking through her windshield, and all of a sudden you don't see zombies, you see slices of bread piling on top of her windshield, and it's like it's a magic movie moment. I don't know. I think it's great. Other people might go, whatever.
I think it's absolutely amazing. I love it. This is an 8-minute short film. They really do the entire movie in 8 minutes, replacing zombies with slices of bread. They've got all the same beats, the same points. It's shot in black and white. It's shot in very similar locations to the original, and it's beautiful. It's done with such love for the original. It really is amazing, absolutely amazing, and it's available on YouTube. And it was shot in 1990, so it was done on film as well, and it just looks great. It really is.
There was another movie that came out where they did the same thing. Well, they didn't do the same thing. They utilized Night of the Living Dead, and what they called it, at the time, it was the world's longest movie title, and it was like Night of the Day, of the Sun, of the Dawn, of the whatever, Living Dead. It was like 20 words long was the title, and in that case, they took the original footage for Night of the Living Dead and they just overdubbed it. And what they overdubbed it with was just crazy nonsense. That's another good one. I'd put those two movies side by side in my movie collection.
I've heard of this. I've either somebody was telling me about it, or I don't remember watching it, but I've definitely heard of it, and I can't remember who it was who mentioned it, or I just stumbled across it.
The Day of the Dawn, of the Sun, of the Living. And then it goes on from there. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. It's the title is worth it for the title alone. Derek, another one of our regular viewers. Hi, Derek. Hope you're well. So, Joe, what is your favorite tune to play just for you? Do you have a favorite tune that you enjoy playing?
Wow. There are things that, if I pick up an instrument, they're going to be like the first few things I play. An actual favorite piece of music that I like to play. That's a tough one. I'm sure there is one. I don't know how to answer that question. It depends. And it also depends based on what I'm about to do, because when I was a kid, I started very young. My hero at the time was Eddie Van Halen. I want to be like Eddie Van Halen and play as fast as I could and do all this cool stuff. And then I also got into blues. And I used to have a neighbor. His name was Kevin Paskey. We lived there were a bunch of us some of us from high school still were friends on Facebook. So I lived on the same block as Joe Walsh and Jeremy Pasternak and Kevin Paskey and Jason Fila and Josh Weaver and a bunch of these guys. But Kevin in particular, he really latched onto my talent for being able to play guitar. And what he would do during the summer is, if he had a girlfriend over, he'd bang on my door and he'd be like, "Hey, we're down by the lake. Can you bring your guitar and can you play music for us?" "Sure, no problem, Kevin." So I grab my guitar and I go down there and basically what I liked to play for that scenario is much different than what I would like to play for myself. Well, when I play for myself, I'm trying to create something. If I'm trying to impress a girl, now my wife, I'm going to play something different, right? So that's not an easy question to answer. I gotta say, great question. And now I'm going to spend the next week obsessing over how I could have answered that better.
It's always the way. This is what the questions we get asked by these guys are always lovely left field questions, which I always find some of the most interesting ones. So Night of the Living Bread. Thank you, Derek. That really is a great question. Okay, so I think what I'd like to talk about now is something that happened to your family. In fact, you mentioned your Uncle Ed earlier on.
Yeah.
Which led to a book which he wrote called True Haunting,
Right.
which then led to a documentary. Well, and basically he wrote this sometime after the events had happened, but led to a documentary. And you're saying is now leading on to a feature film, but we'll come back to that later on.
Right.
But let's start with, when did you first hear the story about the True Haunting, and how did it first come into your family?
We used to talk about it. Basically, this happened in 1970. I wasn't born until 1976. And so obviously, it was still a topic of conversation, but it would come up at Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday parties, whatever, periodically. And I remember hearing some of the stories, which were not covered in the documentary because they only had an hour. And like as early as maybe like 7 or 8 years old.
So
this was a massive thing that happened. So it was every few family gatherings it would come up, and basically my uncle was kind of ushered into him, write a book, write about it, write about it, write about it, write about it, until he did. And now they're going to make a major motion picture out of it, I guess. He's already signed the contracts. He's already gotten some of his payments, and but you never know how that can go, because they can even buy everything outright and never put it on the shelf. So
okay, so around about 8 years old. So not everyone will know the story that we're talking about. So what is the story that you first heard, and let's fill people in on what we're actually talking about here.
Okay. When I first started hearing stories about it, it was about just events that occurred in the house. And so people understand what actually happened, I can give a broader view. Ultimately, the poor guy bought what is essentially kind of like the most haunted house ever. And it was out of desperation. Him and his wife were pregnant with my cousin, and when they announced the pregnancy to the landlord said, no pets, no babies. So in other words, like, get out, right? So they needed to put a roof over their heads, and my uncle found a 2-flat, or I don't know what they call them over there, but over here they're called 2-flats. So it's a house, but there's an apartment on the top level and there's an apartment on the bottom level. He bought that, rented out the bottom level to essentially pay for the mortgage, and then they lived on the top level, and found out that the place was haunted, and it was so bad that it actually led to the world's first nationally televised exorcism on NBC. And that seemed to have taken care of things for a little bit, but then I had an aunt get involved and kind of reignited whatever was previously there, and that got to the point where they had to move out. They had to get out, and I'm not allowed to give out the address of the house, but I know the address. And when you look this place up, it's been bought and sold probably a good 60 to 65 times since 1970. Nobody ever lasts there any longer than 6 months. And some of the views of this thing are kind of crazy, because it's constantly for sale. So you have those real estate sites that show you pictures of the inside of the house, and it's been modernized. And one of the things that they modernized was they made damn sure they put the biggest windows in this thing that they could to bring in as much light as possible. And to the point where one of the downstairs bedrooms, when they put a great big picture window in just a small bedroom, it faces the garage. So there's no view. They're not looking at anything. They're just trying to get light in there. And there's a cross on the wall above the bed in the photograph. Now, this is today. These events that happened to my uncle were in 1970. So you look at the history of the buying and the selling of the house, and then you add that with the exorcism, and then you add that with the actual events that occurred, and it's like there's some bad juju on that place. It's actually a real haunting. It's not was something Hollywood fabricated, and there's nothing, really all that crazy about it. Just that, these things really occurred, and a lot of it was caught on film, and it was caught by NBC, and yeah, pretty scary stuff.
The documentary.
You saw the documentary, right?
I saw the documentary, which was a paranormal. It was on Sci-Fi.
Yeah.
You very kindly supplied me with a link. So it's a drama documentary, or docudrama, we call them over here, where basically they're recreating an awful lot of the incidents that happen. So basically, as you say, your Uncle Ed had to move in with his wife, and they had the baby, your cousin, and it started as all these things. There's a lovely thing. Basically, she had a glass candy jar that she put in the center of the table. She turned her back on it for a moment, and then it's at the edge of the table. So
that was like one of her prized possessions too. So she didn't like that getting messed with.
No, I could. It's just, and it's really, really well done, and it is quite chilling. And the documentary explores some of the history of the house, the family that was living there before, the crazy woman who was there when he went to view the house. It's
the 12,000 birds that were swirling around the house during the exorcism. the poor sound guy who was the only one in the room. He's like, "Can you hear that?" And everybody's like, "No, what are you talking?" Like, creepy, just creepy stuff.
It's really, I can imagine that they're going to make a really interesting a film out of it. And it is basically they invited or they rented out the lower room to a couple with a baby as well, and she left with the baby first, right, before, and then your Aunt April, I believe, moved in. But it's if you can find the documentary, it's really interesting. It's very, very interesting. I started reading the book that your uncle wrote 2011. The book was published.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Although
it was an Amazon bestseller in 2012. I know that. Right.
Yeah, I got as far as reading the introduction, and he made very interesting points in the introduction. He was saying exorcisms don't work. There's exorcising demons, but ghosts aren't demons necessarily.
Right.
And I thought that was very interesting. No, I'd never heard that concept before. The idea that you can, because you're exorcising demons. And there's a lovely moment in the documentary where the priest is obviously going through the motions of this exorcism, and then something happens, and I won't spoil it for you. And he's obviously terrified, and he's just going through the motions because that's what you do to help people who believe that something. Yeah. Okay, there's an interesting question just come in from Kim on this topic. What's your personal view of this, Joe? Do you think, okay, again, it's a kind of a double question. What do you think of horror films dealing with the supernatural, such as the Amityville house? Do you believe that a house or objects can be possessed?
Man, I have multiple answers to that. As far as the Amityville horror is concerned, the Warrens, I believe was their name. I think they were primarily Amway salespeople, and I think that book in that movie was extremely embellished upon for Hollywood sales purposes. Whereas the reason it's taken a while for there to be an actual agreement between my uncle and any film studio is that he wants there to be none of that. He wants them to stay true to the story. This was real. Stick with it. Don't try and do any goofy, flying Slimers like in Ghostbusters or anything, because none of that happened. Just stick to what actually happened, and it's truly scary stuff. Do I believe that something evil can attach itself to an entity such as a house or an object? Yes, I absolutely do. What that is, I'm not going to say, other than I do believe that there are positive energies and good energies, negative, positive, they can attach themselves to things, and some places can have more of it than others. So my uncle's house obviously had a ton of bad juju attached to it, and the only solution for him was to get away from it and, you know, stop ownership. What was the other question again?
Well, actually, you kind of asked, you answered both questions.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a very full and interesting. I'd be really interested in, say, having watched the documentary. If I get the time, I'm going to have a read of the book, because it sounds very interesting in terms of what's happened and sticking, because it's not, as you say, and that comes, and I think that part of the power of the documentary, it's the things that happen, you think, well, you could kind of explain that away in a kind of a scientific-y way. But there's obviously, it appears there's more going on.
Well, it's with my uncle's house. The thing that I find interesting is that, yeah, nearly everything that occurred, nearly everything, could be explained away scientifically, like you said. So you got a creaky house. It's not a ghost. You got a creaky house. You got pipes that squeal. Okay, it's not a ghost. It's you have pipes that squeal, but the frequency and the nature of it's like, if it's like, okay, I have a door that opens and slams shut by itself periodically, and the house is creaking, and I hear screaming in the next room, and these things are flying off the bookshelves, and, you know, the phone just jumped off the hook. And when you have that many things that occur that frequently, it's not the house settling. Then you just have to admit that there's some bad energy there, whatever it is. So my aunt did the best she could. She got somebody to come and bless the place, and then they did the exorcism. And I mean, you know, NBC got involved, and there was something wrong. There is something wrong with that house, and so you know, there are multiple people that can tell the story. There are the people that lived there at the time. I'm sure there are plenty of other stories that go with that rental property, which is it has remained from everyone who's attempted to live there. But yeah, it's not too cool of a thing in reality. It's not something that should be played with like my aunt tried doing.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's very interesting part of the documentary as well, about exactly what happened after the couple who were living downstairs and the choices your aunt made. But again, you know, we're talking about the 1970s. It was a different time then.
Right.
But I also think it's very much about how we approach the supernatural and our own belief system, etc. But I did find it absolutely fascinating. Okay, so I recommend you find a book called True Haunting. If you can find so your uncle's name was Edwin Becker?
Correct.
Edwin F. So the book is True Haunting by Edwin F. Becker. It's available on Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk. It's available Kindle, paperback. He published it himself independently, because he says in his introduction he didn't want editors going in and saying, well, can't you juice this up a bit, can't you do that, as you've been explaining. And it was a very disturbing watch at 11:30 last night through to gone midnight.
I'm kind of glad
the only chance I had to actually sit down and watch it. It's kind of like, I'm gonna have to do this now. Why do I always end up by having to do these things late at night? I don't like it. It's very interesting. So I'd like to talk now about your album Monster.
Yeah.
The singular. See,
and the way you've ordered everything, it perfectly kind of leads up to that, because that all started with my involvement in horror movies, and then you know, every other outside influence in my life. So basically, what that album is, well, you heard the album. What do you think the album is? How does it sound to you? You gave me a very nice quote for use on my website, which I really appreciate.
I did. What I said about it is that it is like, it's kind of like, and this is not what I said on the quotation, but what I was kind of struggling for is that there's a kind of, it's like biting into a sugared almond and discovering that there's poison in the middle of the sugared almond. It's the
great.
music is so sublime. It's gorgeous music, and but the message, the lyrics, and what it is you're actually talking about is kind of like, oh, that's not nice at all. So
but you're laughing, right?
What
do you see the comedic value in it? Like, if it causes you to laugh, and that's one of the biggest things that I've seen is, I've played this album for several people. I've had several. It's been peer reviewed several times. First, you get the initial shock. Well, actually, first you get the laughter. Then you get the shock of, wait, what did you just say? You know, are you? And then it turns into confusion. And like, I kind of want to sing along with this, but I don't want to say what you're saying. Right? So it's kind of like, it was one of my homage to some of the music that my dad did when I was younger. He did a form of death rock, which was very interesting. And some of those older, like 70s and 80s death rock performers like Alice Cooper. And actually, I kind of designed some of the things that I actually did based on things that Alice Cooper had done. So there's a song on there called Anita. And for this album, Anita serves as Steven, what Steven was on it, Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare. So, and that album is, you know, it's a concept album. It tells a story from the first song all the way to the last. I tried doing that as well. Obviously, I'm not Alice Cooper, so I can't do it as good. But I gave it a go, and that's what's there.
You mentioned Anita. Do you have any other favorite tracks from the album?
Oh, I love everything on on the album. Every single thing.
Which one do you think would you do as a single? Which one would you think would probably stand alone best as a single?
Anita. I like Anita. I think Anita is the one of the, that or When a Bone Breaks.
Okay.
I have the children singing along and everything. So yeah.
It's really good. And where can people listen to it?
Anywhere they can listen to or buy music. It's available at every single outlet. iTunes, Amazon.com. I don't know, where do people, I steal most of my music, so I don't know. I don't where
Shame on you. Shame
no, actually,
on you.
The truth is I don't listen to any real modern music, so I listen to the old stuff. So there, you know, I'm still at home listening to Billy Joel and you know, the Beatles and things like that. You know, Electric Light Orchestra, Jeff Lynne, the Traveling Wilburys. That's the stuff that gets me going. And you know, so, and that's you know, part of my inspiration for working is I want to make something that sounds beautiful. Whether I'm talking about cutting you into pieces while I'm making that is, you know, that's a whole different topic.
Right.
But if it sounds beautiful,
you've just reminded me that I've got some Billy.
Another one. You heard Prelude off of Monster. That's the second song that's all entirely piano. That's another one of my favorites because it sounds so pretty.
Yeah.
You know, it's not pretty.
It's certainly is acoustic piano, and I'm trying to remember. I haven't had a chance to listen to it in the last few days. How much of it is acoustic and how much is electric?
It's just an acoustic piano and my voice. That's all track 2 is. Track 1 is just disturbing. Then the music kind of really starts at track 2, and that's, you know, that's another one of my favorites from that album. But I mean, really, the whole thing is a work. It says a lot. It tells a story. It says a lot, and each piece is kind of functional. I've had people email me and say, like in the case of Prelude, man, I would love to sing that to this person or that person or the other person. They can't because it's so disturbing and wrong. But you know, I had a reviewer tell me that the album was perfect you wanted to threaten someone and you wanted them to leave you alone permanently and never contact you again, take any one of those tracks and send it to that person, and they will leave you alone. So,
yeah, this is kind of like that thing. I love the music, hate the lyrics, but it's
no, you don't. You love
I
the
kind
lyrics.
of
You
hate
just don't want
I
to say
hate
that
you
you
for
love the
making me
lyrics.
love it so much, and they're very catchy songs as well. I remember listening to it and going, I really want to get that tune out of my head now. I don't want that as an earworm. I really don't want that as an earworm.
I'm really good at getting the tune stuck in your head.
Yeah.
So I use that mechanism to get something else stuck in your head, and it's stuck there. It's your problem if you can't get it out. Get it surgically removed.
In case you haven't guessed, folks, I actually really did enjoy this album. It's very good. It's Monster, singular, from Joe Becker, iTunes, the usual legal places where you can purchase and give Joe money for his work, because I'm all supportive of that idea. You mentioned other films. You mentioned Leaf Blower Massacre 2. It's something that's coming out soon, or
that just came out. It's hitting several different types of shows. There's different film venues and things that it's appearing at. It is available on DVD. You need to go buy that. That also has a great scene by Joe DiBartolo. I'm not sure if you know him. I think you might. He's a Chicago-based actor. He was in some of those older TV shows about the mob. He typically plays like a mobster. In this movie, he plays a bum. And I did the music for the whole film, but in that case, what it was he has one big scene in the beginning where, as a bum, he's walking down the streets of Chicago looking for food, and he's digging out of dumpsters, looking at, basically eating other people's throwaways. And that scene actually uses one of my songs, which came out in 2005, I think it was, which is Blues for Drinking. And the music and the cinematography, everything, his acting, everything, it all goes together. To me, that's a magic moment in that film. So there's that. There's Muerte Tales of Horror, which is coming out very shortly. Right now, it's playing in several different theaters in Texas, and I believe it's getting released through Cinema Epoch. And I think you know who they are too. And speaking of those movies that are so bad they're good, I have probably half a dozen movies that are on Cinema Epoch. Two of them are from a guy named Gino McGahee. They were his first two movies, and one of them is called Rise of the Scarecrows, and that has been labeled the best worst movie of all time. So I'm really happy to have music in that. And I have there's another movie that's currently, I think they're in post-production by now. I think they have maybe one more shoot and they're going into post-production, and that would be a movie called Bottom Creek. And basically, I don't even want to tell you what that's about, because when you go to look for it and you see the artwork for the movie, you'll know what that's about. And that's another really, disturbing storyline. And I think they're using two of the tracks from Monster in that movie, because obviously Monster is extremely disturbing. So, that those two things go together.
Yeah.
Gosh. I don't know. I probably have another. I'm probably failing people right now, because there's probably another half dozen movies that I should be pushing that are either out now or coming out now. But I'm kind of drawing a blank because I'm into so much. And so I'll obsess about this for another week as well after we're done. I should have said this, that, and the other thing.
I mean, your website is joebecker.com?
No.
No.
It used to be joebecker.com until I did not pay for the registration of the URL on time, and some Chinese company stole it. And they've been trying to charge me $5,000 in order to get it back ever since. So I changed it to joebeckermusic.com. It's one word, joebeckermusic.com.
Right. Joe Becker Music. joebeckermusic.com.
I'm gonna wait until you forget to pay for Nicholas Vince stuff, and then I'm gonna buy it and be like, all right, $5,000, pal. And then I
Hopefully,
can get
dear
Joe
God, I've got it on
Becker
auto
back,
renew. It
right?
should be on auto renew. Poverty can always hit, and I don't have the money in the bank account. That can always happen.
Yeah.
Actor, that's easily going to be, that could easily happen. But then, you're on a hiding to nothing anyway. If I can't afford to, then I can't afford to pay anybody, $5,000 to get it back again. Right, we're near it. We are not at the end of the show yet. We're nearing the end of the show. We've got time for one more question from Kim. Joe, do you like heavy metal music, as some have horror-themed lyrics, bands such as Black Sabbath, Dio, etc., etc.?
Absolutely. Basically, well, if you go to my website, you'll see I try to touch everything. So I've done classical music, I've done pop music, I've done blues music, I've done rock, I've done metal, I've done neoclassical, I've done neoclassical speed metal, I've done from one end of the gamut to the next, and I'm still going. I'm trying to touch everything. My next thing is going to be country. Anybody who knows me, they know that that's going to be very interesting. But yeah, I don't listen to kind of any modern music, really very little of it. The ones that I do are doing throwbacks to the previous eras. Those are the guys that I like today. But modern music, modern metal, if they're calling it metal, I don't see anything that's very metal about it. But yeah, absolutely, there's lots of those guys that Dio, Sabbath was like, truth be told, Ozzy Osbourne's a really cool guy. It sucks that he's done to himself what he's done to himself, but it is what it is. No, I love all that stuff. And what's great is that I kind of get some of those accolades in these movies, and I've never talked about that. So I'm typically not the only composer on a film. There are a few where I am, but really, these filmmakers, they either have friends or that are in bands, or they're already in connection with other bands, and they kind of get 2, 3 composers together, 4, and here's a sprinkling of bands. We're gonna have all this music through the film, and because I do horror, 99% of the other bands, they're strictly death metal, death fusion, speed metal, so, and then you have me, and I'm the guy that knows how to make pretty music. Well, for the most part, unless you're listening to Monster, I'm the guy. So unless you're using one of my metal tracks, chances are you're listening to something that sounds very pretty, and it gets placed around all of this other stuff, which is all death metal oriented. And I like that. I like that association. I like what those guys do. And I have several friends in several bands, and that's what they do. We have a mutual respect for each other, and it's a great working relationship. And yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, when we chatted last night, I said 3 topics was going to be enough, and you poo-pooed the idea. And you said, but what are we going to talk about? And I said, well, we've just talked for an hour, all the way through. So thank you so much for joining me.
I wish we weren't done. Like you need to do an episode that's like 2 or 3 hours long, so we can really work through everything that we need to talk about. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I actually had questions I wanted to ask. You did answer some of them for me last night, and they mostly revolved around the stuff you kept from the movies that you've been in and the characters that you've played, like the moon-headed guy in Nightbreed, and obviously in Hellraiser as the Chatterer. I love your channel's name, The Chattering, and the fact that I'm even talking to you is just like, no one's going to be able to talk to me like for the next month. I mean, you don't talk to Joe Becker this way. Joe Becker talked with Nicholas Vince live for an hour. You know who that guy is? You don't talk to me. You don't talk to me this way. I'm probably gonna get fired tomorrow because I'm gonna go into work and My boss is going to ask me to do something. Hey, you don't talk to me that way. Do you know who I am? I talk with Vince. Have
Well,
you
that's
ever
very
seen?
sweet. That's very sweet of you.
It's the truth, man.
That's very sweet. That's very kind of you. All right, that's well, we should wind down. We should finish now because I've been working in the garden all day. There are now things that we need to get done. Oh dear. Oh, Joe, I appear to have lost Joe. Oh, that's very odd. Not quite sure what happened there. Yeah. Did mention his aunt was called April. Yeah. Anyway, that was me talking with Joe Becker, who I really do recommend his album Monsters for something that is incredibly pretty and really not very nice. And the book, The Haunting, by his uncle, Edwin F. Becker, available on us. Do check that out as well as Night of the Living Bread, which is available on YouTube. It's done with such love. I love it. Now, next show, not quite sure. There may basically what's happening next week, and certainly next week there will be no show because I'm going to be at the opening of the London Horror Festival, and that's where I'm going to be most of October through to the beginning of November. I'm going to be either that or at Fright Fest or doing other things. So I will let you know if it's possible I'll do a show in the middle of November. I'm just waiting for a guest to come back to me. We had agreed the date of the 14th of October, but they've not come back to me again. So I'm just trying to get that nailed down. So possibly on the 14th of October. Otherwise, there will be some more shows in November. In the meantime, I'm going to be at the London Horror Festival, which is at the Old Red Lion Theatre, Angel in North London. If you're coming along to see any of your shows and there, do please say hello. I love chatting to people, obviously. Duh. Yeah, in the meantime, do take care of yourselves as the nights draw in and there's spooky things. And really, I'm sure Joe's all right, really. Okay, folks, take care. And this has been Chattering with Nicholas Vince, and I was talking with Joe Becker, who may make some more music again someday. Take care, folks.